Hello, this is Jon Kopper from EMD. In this tutorial, I'll guide you through the whole process creating a visualization of a solar photovoltaic plant on a photo. We will start from scratch using a photo and a layout from a GIS file and go all the way step by step so anyone can do the same. We will create PV panels, vegetation, fences, do advanced masking and also reveal a few tricks in Photoshop at the end. And don't forget, if you have windPRO and you have a service agreement, you also have help. We won't let you down in the middle of a project. A table of content is available in the video description if you want to jump to a specific section. And as an experiment, I have used an AI-generated voice for the rest of the video, and I am very curious what you think about it. So please don't hesitate to add a comment to the video if you like it or if you don't. Now I'll just hand it over to my alter ego.
I have now launched windPRO and zoomed in on the project area. I know that I took my photo from around here and that the plant is out in this area. When creating a new project, you start by giving it a site center and a file name. I start that process by double-clicking on the map. I give the project a file name. In this dialog, I just press OK. Now I will add some elevation data to my project. This is for windPRO to be able to place objects correctly on the surface of the ground. As you can see, there are a lot of elevation sources available. I don't select the highest resolution, in this case 0.4 meter grid, because this can make my PV panels jump up and down as they will follow every little bump in the elevation data, and that is not realistic. I instead select the 10 meter grid that is also available here. We recommend using grid data because it has some advantages when doing visualizations. Now the project is created. You can see we have two objects created, and they are placed on different layers that we can show and hide. One of the objects is the object containing the elevation data. Now I want to extend my elevation data with lower resolution data. This is for making sure that the horizon line feature that is used for camera calibration has enough data to show the horizon correctly. The data I added is surface data, meaning it contains also the height of vegetation, and that is why windPRO asks this question. It is not important what you answer here for what we are doing. I will just hide the elevation data. Now I will add another map. This is the new GIS map that is available in windPRO 4.2. I will zoom in to level 16 and center the map. Now we are ready to start the real work. Now I will insert a camera object to hold the photo and quickly calibrate it. Calibration means that I find the precise position, direction, rotation, and focal length. When all that is set right, windPRO Photo Montage can add the artificial elements, like PV panels, correctly on the photo. If you want a more detailed demonstration of this, then watch this video. I will use this layer for the camera. I maximize the map to better finding the spot where I took the photo. I insert the camera at the spot and set the direction. Now a dialog pops up. I want to change the default height above the elevation model to 1.8 meters. Now I select the photo that I have saved in my project folder. The photo contains some metadata called Exif data. In this dialog, I can select if I want to import any of this to my camera object. As you can see, it has the position from the camera's GPS, but I don't want to use it because I know it is imprecise, and I trust the position I selected on the map more. Using a precision GPS is a huge benefit, and we have another video on our channel about it if you are interested. Then there is this parameter. This is a value I have entered in a previous session that I found works nicely with this camera and lens. So, even if this is a prime 35mm lens, meaning it has a fixed zoom, I found that its real focal length is closer to 34.14mm. And by adding this conversion factor, I initialize my camera model with the correct focal length every time. But be aware, you cannot use the exact same focal length every time, even if it is the same prime lens you are using, because the focal length also depends on the distance to your focus point. That's why you will see that I will still optimize the focal length in a little while. Now I close the dialogues, and the photo montage window appears. The direction of the camera will never be correct to begin with, and I can change it by holding down the control button and dragging on the image. I try to make the theoretical yellow horizon line match the real horizon line. It is totally off, so I now point the cursor at the slurry tank that I can also see on the map. When the direction is correct, the trace line will also point at the slurry tank, so now I control-drag the image until it does. Now the horizon line matches too. To further calibrate the camera model, I can now do several things, and I choose to import the position of the nearby wind turbines from OpenStreetMap. I will just speed up the next things I do. What happens is that I convert the WTGs to control points and gives them the height 100 meters. I just change the length of the camera center line and the angle lines. I can control point on an object to find out where it is drawn on the photo. Then I control-drag the control points to the position of the WTGs, and at the same time making sure the horizon line is where it should be. When it is so, I do a point-out position on picture at the bottom of the control to tell PhotoMontage that this is where I want it to be. I do this for the WTG most to the left and the one most to the right. When I make the second fit, the first one is out of place, and that is because the camera model's rotation and focal length is not exactly right. Then I start the Auto Optimize Camera Model tool and set it to optimize the direction, rotation, and focal length. That's better. The horizon line and the WTGs are now in place, and so is the slurry tank. Finally, I do a check by pointing out different buildings on the image and checking that the trace line is going in the correct direction on the map. It all looks okay. Now the camera model is calibrated, and I can start designing the solar PV plant that I want to visualize. First, I hide the horizon line. It is a bit in the way. Then I load the specification I have of the PV layout. In this example, I have it in a GeoPackage file. As you can see, it contains different areas of PV panels, and with windPRO, I can create a 3D version of these panels that matches this closely. This diagram shows the dimensions that should be used. It also shows that there should be a fence around the plant, and that there should be shown vegetation. All this we can do. This diagram is generated by windPRO and the SketchUp integration tool. It will not be explained in this video, but you can find the feature here. Back to the design of the plant. I will show two ways to do it. First, the most straightforward way that may not give a 100% match, and then an alternative method where you have full control of each table position. The first method requires the solar PV module, and it goes like this. I now create a new layer and insert a solar PV object. This object can hold different areas with different settings. When it is created, it automatically goes into edit mode. I maximize the map window and clicks on the map to start digitizing the first area. When I am done, the area is filled with panels. You can see them on the map in a gray color. I am restoring the window layout so I can see the settings of the PV area. I also disable the background maps so I can see if the panels windPRO created matches the specification. Of course they don't. I need to adjust the parameters. You can see that the panels that are smaller units are arranged in tables, and here the size of the table. Anytime I can show how the 3D model looks based on my current settings. I still need to define the substructure. I am now opening the table position setup. I select Centered with Auto Spacing to align the rows of tables to the sides of the area in both east and west direction. Also, I add a buffer. My plan is to use the solar area not only to place the panels, but also to define where to put the fence and vegetation. I apply the changes and close the window. Already now it looks much better, but I will still adjust the area to get an even better match of the specification. I just enable this, else it will not update the tables before I take the PV object out of edit mode. Now it is just a matter of adjusting the polygon until I get a satisfactory result. Now there is a problem. I chose to solve this by adding an exclusion area. I do that in all similar cases. As you can see, it is possible to match the layout pretty well like this. Now I will just move on to the next area. This area is different because it has east-west facing panels. I don't have detailed information about the design of the east-west facing panels, so I just have to guess what it is to make it match. I don't like the blue color, so I change it to something that is more transparent. Let's just do this quickly. Now I am satisfied about the panel's layout, at least it is pretty accurate close to the camera. Now we get to the fun part. We can now try and see how it looks in photo montage. First, it shows the symbol layer, and here we can see, as lines, where the rows of tables are going to go. The lines are going along the ground in front of the panels. Now I press the render button. And here we have it. It looks pretty cool, but you also see that there is still work to do. In fact, the most time-consuming part is often in post-processing, and I have deliberately designed this tutorial to showcase many of the common challenges you would need to solve. We will go through this in the section that we could headline masking, but first I will just kick in the alternative way of designing the PV plant, and that is by using the SketchUp integration tool. For this, you need the SketchUp integration module in windPRO, and here comes the workflow. First, I will hide the layer with the PV object. Then it will not be used by photo montage. Then I will just create a couple of new layers that I will use in a little while. Then I launch the SketchUp integration tool from this button. On the intro page, you can find links to the manual and other useful things. I will just shift over to the Workspace panel. Among these tools are different kinds of 3D content creators. With these, you can create all sorts of content for your photo montage visualization. In this tutorial, we will later use this for creating vegetation and this one for creating fences around the plant, and right now we will use it for creating PV panels. First step is to start up SketchUp by clicking this button. SketchUp is not a part of windPRO, but must be purchased and installed separately from SketchUp.com. We recommend using the latest version of SketchUp Pro, but windPRO supports versions all the way back to SketchUp Make 2017. That is a free version for non-commercial use. SketchUp starts up with an empty template. To have something to relate to, we just create a 3D surface. For that, we use this content creator. I just set it up and press OK. Now it shows up in this list, and I must run it before anything happens in SketchUp. This way you can quickly change the setup and run it again. Here you see the result. You can navigate around in the model using the Orbit tool like this and zoom with the mouse scroll button. In the Tray palette, you can quickly show and hide the content you created from windPRO. Now I load the content creator that can create solar PV panels. Here is a list of predefined objects I can use. These are SketchUp models, and you can of course edit them or create your own. For the south-facing panels, I choose to use this model that is not too complex. Now I need to tell the tool where to put them, and as the title indicates, it is by giving it a set of lines. The model will then be added along each line and scaled so the height is 3.2 meters. If the added models cannot perfectly fit the length of the line, then they are stretched vertically just enough so they do. If I had a shapefile with such lines, I could use it directly, but the GeoPackage file I have cannot be used directly. I could convert it in QGIS with a Python script, it is not so hard, but I will not do that in this tutorial. Instead, I will show how to do it with the windPRO ruler object. I simply say I want to use all visible rulers, and that's it. Now I just have to create the rulers. I select the layer named Ruler, so new rulers go into this layer. I then do the little trick to hold down Shift key while selecting to insert the ruler object. Then I start inserting rulers for each line of panels. I am sure you don't mind that I again speed up the video for a little while. When I get to the east-west facing panels, I put them in the other ruler layer, and I just extend the camera angle lines so I can skip the panels that are not visible from the camera. Now I will just speed up again. That's it. Now I have a ruler for each line of panels. Before creating the panels, I will just show a little trick. I change the coordinate system to a UTM system. I then select all the south-facing rulers and copy them to Excel using the clipboard. In Excel, I have full control and can edit the rulers or add new. Right now, I just change the angle to 90 degrees. Then I copy-paste them back. I delete the selected ones to prevent getting them double. Now they are all aligned. Now back to the SketchUp integration tool. As you remember, we just added this content creator. That creates solar panels along all visible ruler objects. I now hide the layer with the rulers for the east-west facing panels, and then I run it. I click this button to focus SketchUp, and you can see that the panels are now created. The positions are spot on. I now want to create the east-west facing panels. For that, I clone the existing creator. I edit it and select a suitable 3D model, and set the height to 2.5 meters. Now I make sure the correct rulers are visible by checking the correct layers. Then I run the new creator. Again, I focus SketchUp to see the result. It is just perfect. Now I want to use these panels in my photo montage, and that is quite simple. I can select the elements I want and then copy them to a 3D object in windPRO. To make sure that I not accidentally select the surface model, I first hide it and then I select the rest. I just go back to windPRO to make sure that the correct layer for the new 3D object is active. Then I select this right-click menu, and that is it. Back in windPRO, you can see that a 3D object is created. It contains the elements we just exported from SketchUp. You can see how the 3D object slowly paints itself on the map. Also, you can see it on the symbol layer in Photo Montage. The painting of the 3D object symbols can slow down windPRO significantly, and it can help to turn it off completely. You can do it here in the 3D object settings. Now I just render the photo montage again, this time using the 3D object version of the PV plant. And there we have it. It looks a bit different, partly because it is not the exact same 3D models or panel positions, but also you may notice that this version does not have the same reflection effect as the PV object version we created first. Here you can better see what I mean. In the Photoshop section of this tutorial, I will show how to get the same effect on the last rendering using Photoshop. Okay, before I show how to create vegetation and fences, I will talk a bit about masking, a very important topic, because it is often here you will spend a lot of time when creating solar visualizations. What do I mean when I talk about masking? Well, it is the process of erasing the part of the visualization that should be hidden behind something, as here, where the panels are rendered on top of the building. I will show how to fix that with the rubber tool. If I move on, we have a similar problem here, where panels go on top of the small trees and bushes. I will solve that by adding artificial vegetation in front of the panels here instead. Here we have a more complex situation with these buildings. You can see them at the trace line on the map too. They are behind the panels from the green area, but in front of the panels from the red area. So what should I erase? I will solve it using this tool. Over here you see another typical challenge. I can see the panels that are far away through the field underneath the closer position tables. I will fix that using the Auto Erase feature. There is a line of trees here. They are in the middle of the plant area and must be removed. That is also a common situation, and I will show how to do that in the Photoshop section of this tutorial. Over here we also have the problem that we can see through the surface where tables are positioned behind the hill. Again, this can be solved using the Auto Erase feature. Let's go back and start from the beginning. Now I will demonstrate the rubber tool. First, I zoom in a lot on the working area, and then I activate the tool. As you can see, you can set the size and other settings here. Then I simply start painting with the left mouse button on the map. You can zoom in and out on the photo using the scroll button on the mouse, and zooming out has the effect that the eraser becomes bigger in pixels. You can undo what you erase by using the right mouse button. At some point, you would need a much smaller size. You can also use Control and mouse scroll to change the size. You can choose to hide the rubber while you are using it, and then the red colors does not show. I will just leave it here. I think you got the idea. Now we move on to the next case. Here the vegetation should be in front of the panels, and as before we could fix it using the rubber tool, but that would take forever. In fact, I would recommend to do it in Photoshop instead if you have the option, and in the Photoshop section of this tutorial I will show a way to do it there. But right now we will use a quick fix by adding some artificial vegetation in front of the panels instead. First, I just add a couple of layers for some new objects. I make the obstacle layer active, and then I add an obstacle object to show where to put the vegetation. Then I go to the SketchUp tool. Here I add a vegetation creator. I can select from a list of templates. This template, for instance, you can use if you want to show newly planted vegetation. I select to use this one. I set the height to 6 meters. I want to place it at the position of the selected windPRO obstacle objects. Apparently, I have closed SketchUp, so I just start it up again. Then I run the vegetation creator. You can see that there is now created some vegetation in SketchUp at the position of the selected obstacle object in windPRO. Please notice this behavior. The vegetation is flat images that are always turning to face the viewpoint. Because of this, you would need to move the viewpoint to the approximate position of the photo point in windPRO before exporting the vegetation. Also, I need to activate the correct layer in windPRO. Now I can do the export. Back in windPRO, you can see that a 3D object is created, and you can see the individual flat trees on the map. If I go to Photo Montage and activate the symbol layer, you can also see them. Now I render the image again. Here we have it. As you can see, it looks extremely realistic. If you think it is not dense enough or want to add some additional trees here and there, then you could either move or copy some trees in SketchUp before exporting to windPRO, or you could just run the vegetation creator multiple times. If you find it is too dark, you can change the light settings on the 3D object. You can also do it in post-processing in Photoshop, as I will show later. Now we will move on to showing how to use the Photo Mask tool. We have this common situation where PV panels are placed partly in front and partly behind an object on the image. In this case, it is these buildings and trees out here. What we now will do is cut out a part of the image and place it as a 3D object at the correct place in the 3D model. Again, we use an obstacle to define where it should go. I can adjust the size of the obstacle until it covers the area of interest on the photo. Then I add a photo mask creator. I set up what camera I am working on and that I want to use all selected obstacles. Then I run it. It now cuts out the part of the image where the obstacle is placed. I double-click the image to open it in my default PNG file editor. In my case, that is Photoshop. I first unlock the layer, and then I select the lasso tool and starts to select the part I want to use for my 3D model. It is not always important to be precise, as you will realize when you understand the tool. Finally, I inverse my selection and press the Delete button. Then I save it. Now I go back to windPRO, and you can see it has now loaded the modified image. I press OK, and then I focus SketchUp. And there you can see it. It has added a 3D model out there in the middle of the PV plant. You can see it looks a bit weird because it has the shape of an obstacle, but that is not important. Just to make it even more clear what is going on, I will just export the photo montage itself to SketchUp. Here you can see it clearly. The object we just created is placed in the middle of the PV plant, and it looks just right. Now we just need to export it back to windPRO. For the best result, we must activate this setting on the object we just created, else it may be darkened a little bit. Now let's see how it looks in photo montage. What we see here is the previous rendering, without the new object. Now I press the Render button to see the change. And there it is. It looks absolutely perfect. This would be impossible to accomplish with the rubber tool or even in Photoshop. I just go back and forth a few times so you can see how well it works. Great. Now we only have one more masking example in the pipeline, and that one is also an important one. Now we will talk about the auto erase feature. If I zoom in on this part of the image, you can see that something strange is going on. The problem is that we can see through the hill and see some panels that should be hidden. Again, it is hopeless to solve using the rubber tool or Photoshop, so here the auto erase feature comes into play. What it does is that it hides everything that is behind the digital elevation model, and that is just what we need in this situation. Unfortunately, it also slows down the rendering process significantly, but there are a couple of things we can do about it. If I go into the surface setup, you can see it has a few settings. You can select the elevation model to use, and here you may want to use something less detailed if you find it is very slow. But most important is to limit this interval. To find out how far from the camera the problem is, I close the dialog and then use the ruler tool to measure the distance to the horizon line that I can see on the map. It looks like 800 meters is enough. I then go back and update the interval. Now I press the Render button once again and wait to see the effect. There you have it. It completely solved the problem. That was the last part about masking. Now I will quickly show how to create fences and vegetation around the plant. I go back into the SketchUp integration tool. Then I add another line of objects creator. You can see there is a list of templates for fences. You can of course modify them or create your own. I select this one. I want it to be 2 meters high, and I want the sections of the fence to be connected using shearing when following the terrain. Now I need to set up where it should go. I want it to follow the PV area I previously designed, but I don't want a fence at the exclusion areas. As you can see, I could also use other objects, like for instance the ruler. I can use the grow or shrink area option if I want to offset the fence to the inside or the outside of the PV area. I don't want that. I rename the creator to have a shorter name. The name is also used in SketchUp, and these long names can be a bit confusing. Now I am just using a little trick. I select this option. That means that the fence is not only created in SketchUp, but also automatically exported back to windPRO right away. I just create a layer for the fence 3D object, and I then run the exporter. I check in SketchUp that the fence is created as expected, and it is. But it is already exported to windPRO, so I can go right back to windPRO and render it in photomontage. It looks just the way it should. Of course, we need masking, and as you can see, I disabled the vegetation layer so we better can see the rendered fence. But the fence itself looks as it should, and is following the terrain nicely. Now I will show you how we can create vegetation around each of the solar PV areas. I go back into the SketchUp tool, and here I add a new vegetation creator. Again, I need to select a template. I don't want to use the same one this time because it indicates that I know exactly what specific plants are going to be used. Instead, I select a more neutral template that could be any sort of plant. Again, I need to define where it should go, and I create a new setup for that. I want to have it around each PV area, except the exclusion areas. I want to add the vegetation in a 6-meter buffer on the outer perimeter. Finally, I set the height to 4 meters. Then I run the creator and go to inspect the result in SketchUp. It looks fine. I can now modify or delete parts of it before I export it back to windPRO. Again, I just want to mention that the individual objects are flat images. That is always facing the viewpoint. And therefore, it is important that we move to the camera position before doing the export. Since I already have exported the photo montage to SketchUp, I can go to the camera point by clicking this tab. Now I just need to select the vegetation and export it to windPRO. But in many situations, this could end up being an enormous 3D object that would take a long time to export and also a long time to render in photo montage. Therefore, it is best to only select and export the part that is visible from the camera point. That is what I am doing now. I also want to put it on its own layer in windPRO. The existing vegetation layer contains the object I made for the masking example, so I will create another layer. Finally, I can do the export. Now I can render it in photomontage. I just disable the PV layer so we can see how it looks better. Here it is. You can see it follows the terrain nicely as well as the fence does. I think it is a bit bright compared to the existing vegetation, so I will just turn it down a notch. I enable the PV layer and render again. Now it looks much more like the existing vegetation. I just realized that I did not use the masking object I created for the area out here. It ended up on the obstacle layer. I will just turn it on and render again. Much better. We will now continue to the Photoshop section of the tutorial, where I will show how you can work with masking as well as shining the result up a bit in different ways. Over time, I have post-processed photo montages in Photoshop many times, and I have found that I am often doing the same things over and over. I will just share the most essential. First, I will show the simplest way to do masking in Photoshop that is a lot like how it works with the rubber tool in windPRO. First, I copy the background image without the render layer to the clipboard. Then I go to Photoshop and create a new file. You can see it detects the size of the content I have on the clipboard, and I just press OK. Then I paste the image and it shows up as a new layer. I now go back to windPRO, enable the render layer, and then copy the image to Photoshop the same way. Then I rename the layers. That is good practice. The bottom layer I just delete. Now I zoom in on this area of interest. You can see that the All layer contains the rendering. I now create a mask to the layer. You use a mask to define where the layer is visible and where it is not. If pixels on the layer are white, the layer is visible. If it is black, it is not, and if it is gray, it is something in between. While the mask is selected, I can now start to paint black using the brush tool. I just demonstrate how to change the size and transparency of the brush by holding down Alt and Control and right-drag the mouse. You can see the brush color here, and it is black. I now paint my mask with black. That was too much, so I change the color to white and undo it, like this. That is the principle. There are, of course, many more tricks, like using the selection tools to select the parts you want to mask, but you can search for other tutorials on that. There are many. One little trick you may not think of is installing alternative brushes. You can find many free brushes on the internet or create your own. Here, I demonstrate a brush I often use. I just reversed what I just did because I now want to demonstrate how to isolate and manipulate the different parts of the renderings. First, I want to create two new layers, one holding only the panels and the other holding only the vegetation. I have the layer containing all, so now I make a rendering containing all but the panels. I copy it to the clipboard and paste it into Photoshop. I then set the layer mode to difference. I use the magic wand tool to select where there is no difference. Notice these settings. I then inverse the selection. Now I can delete the layer. I then do a copy and a paste to copy the selection from the all layer to a new layer. This new layer contains the panels only. Now I do the same thing with the vegetation. Now I have the panels and the vegetation on different layers, and that gives me many possibilities. If I zoom in on this part, you can see that the vegetation we created is a bit pixelated compared with the vegetation on the image. I found that adding just a little bit of blur makes it a lot more realistic. Same thing goes for the panels, so I just redo it on that layer too. I think this looks much better. I also think that our vegetation is a little brighter than the existing, so I create an adjustment layer. You can see that there are a lot of adjustment layer types to choose from, but I will only cover this one in this tutorial. I need to check this to ensure that it only works on the vegetation layer. Now I adjust the settings until I have the best match. Now I do the same for the panels. I can add a second adjustment layer on top of the first one. You can see that the adjustment layers have a mask. On this mask, I can paint where it should be active and where not. First, I select all and press Delete. Because the selected background color is currently black, pressing Delete makes the whole mask black. That turned the bright effect totally off. Then I select the brush tool and make it huge and soft, and then I make a white line across the mask. You can further adjust how intense the effect should be. The Layers section easily becomes a bit messy, and I like to put things in folders. I select the items that I want to put in a folder, and then I create and rename the folder. Now I want to create a shadow effect under the panels. First, I create a layer beneath the panels and vegetation layer. I call it Shadows. Now I paint black on the layer using a suitable brush size. It looks way too dark, so I adjust the transparency of the layer until it looks right. This is a fast and effective way to add a shadow effect to the panels where you think it makes a difference. As you can see, it is very effective. Now I just zoom in on this line of trees that should be removed as a part of the project, so they should not be visible on the visualization. I am using the lasso tool to select what I want to remove. Then I select the fill feature and selects Content Aware. That did the job more than good enough for this purpose. I now move on to this part of the image, where the auto-delete function removed just a little bit too much. I just use the clone stamp tool to fill out the tiny gap. You can use the content-aware fill many places, also here. I select multiple areas and fill them all at once. That was the final demonstration in this tutorial. I hope this is enough to get you going if you are new to the field and that everyone else also learned something. Please let us know at support@emd.dk if there is something you like us to do a tutorial on. Also, follow our YouTube channel to get notified when we add new content. Thank you for watching.